Well, I have missed you, and we had a great time getting away to the mountains on vacation. Slid down a waterfall into 55-degree water. That was a lot of fun. And went to baseball games. Thanks so much to Gerald for filling in for me last week. Really appreciate that. And, it's good to be home. It's good to not be sleeping on a hotel pillow. Because I hated that. I won't miss that. I haven't missed this mask, but I'm going to hang on to it for a little while so we can make sure that we can finally get past this thing, okay? Look forward to that day where it's just a memory. I've also been enjoying watching the Olympics. Anybody else been watching the Olympics? I've been way into it. Stuff that I know nothing about. I couldn't tell you anything about water polo, but I'm all in it when we're playing, okay? And then like handball, I don't know anything about that. Equestrian, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about gymnastics, but I try to tell my kids things like you're supposed to stick the landing. There's different things that you can just kind of understand and pick up from the Olympics, right? From watching it each year. And so it's kind of a fun experience for me this year. This past week, we were at a Durham Bulls baseball game. They filmed a movie there in Durham called Bull Durham. I don't recommend it if you've already seen it. Some of the scenes can be a little raunchy. Some of you have seen that. A bunch of sinners. But it was a lot of fun to be able to go to that game. Well, we sat right next to the bullpen. I tried to get us seats like on the first row. And every time that a foul ball would come close to us, all of the kids would run down to the front row, all the kids that were close to that section. They run down the front row and they start yelling, ball, 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 ball. They sound like a bunch of cats, okay? And anytime some player, or especially when the relief pitchers begin to warm up, they would do the same thing. They run down, ball, 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 hoping to get some kind of souvenir from that game. It reminded me of that scene from Finding Nemo, where the seagulls look at some potential food and they say, mine, 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 mine. You know, it's been a difficult last year and a half, and there's been tough times on some folks here. I know some of you who have had jobs hanging in the balance, and some of you who have changed jobs, and some of you have been out of work. Your job was cut, you were put on furlough, now you went back to work, and now things are really going crazy, and inflation is insane, and the cost of living in the United States is really going up, but specifically, affordable housing in Orlando has become a real problem. Like, some of us feel very fortunate just that we haven't had to worry about, like, the house that we're living in. I'm glad that I'm not having to move right now. Like, if I were having to rent or purchase a place today, I'd be in real trouble. It'd be very difficult to afford something right now. Let me tell you something, regardless of how much we have, God has called us to make room and also keep eyes on each other. Regardless of the state of life that we find ourselves in. And in fact, it's been my experience that when I had the least amount is when I probably was the most generous. I saw an experiment that happened where this guy went around handing money to homeless people. In fact, before he started doing that, he would just drop it and see how many people would return it. And he noticed that the homeless people actually mostly gave it back. And so then he decided just to give them a large sum of money and turned around and left. Well, one guy decided that he would go. He asked the guy, he said, would you stay here? And he runs and he gets a couple of sandwiches. And he comes and he sits down and he gives one to the guy who had given him the money. And he said, it's just nice to be able to share a meal here together. And they just sat down and they just ate lunch together. You see, we are also called to reflect the heart of God. You see, you ever ask yourself, why did God create? Was it because he needed someone and other things to tell him how great that he was? Have you ever thought about why did God, what motivated him to speak the world into existence, to speak the universe into existence? What was his motivation of creation? Why did he create? Why did he even create us? And it was only out of sheer hospitality. Now, some of us think about the word hospitality and it gets wrapped up in things like fried chicken. It gets wrapped up in hosting somebody in your house. It gets wrapped up in trying to clean. It gets wrapped up in Martha Stewart decorating. That's what we sometimes feel hospitality is. But true hospitality, in fact, kingdom hospitality, it means to make space or to make room or to leave room for others. Now, some of you have started reading the Bible from the very beginning. And it was pretty exciting through Genesis. You learned a lot of things through there. You had creation, you had Abraham, you had the flood, you had Joseph's story, which takes up a pretty good portion of the real estate of Genesis. You got to Exodus, and then the children of Israel were able to move their way out of slavery, and then God gives the law, and then there's rebellion that happens back and forth. The associate pastor finally gets left in charge, and they build this golden calf, all right? And then you bog down to the next book, which was what? Leviticus. Anybody's favorite book of the Bible, Leviticus? Robert, really? It's your favorite book? Leviticus typically is the place where a lot of people begin to bog down. And in fact, it creates a lot of arguments. And where we're going to be today in Leviticus chapter 19, there's a lot of things to kind of try to unpack. We're not going to come close to unpacking the whole thing, all right? But many people have lots of conversations about Leviticus chapter 19 when it comes to cultural things now, such as tattoos, or such as, well, how should I shape this beard? How should I manscape this thing these days, all right? But really, Leviticus 19 gives us a great picture of how we're responsible for each other, of how we are to view the people that we get to share humanity, how we get to share this earth for a short amount of time. The things that you have, how do you view those? Are they just yours? Do they belong to the Lord for everyone to use? God has, in my opinion, made us a steward of the blessings that he's given to us. He didn't just bless us because he loved us more, but he blessed us so that he could bless the rest of the world through us. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9. I'm going to be headed a couple of pretty good places from this, all right? So stick with me because this is good foundational stuff for the next few weeks, but even for 10 minutes from now, all right? Leviticus 19, verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. Do you know that in the Old Testament, there are actually 3, maybe 4 different groups of people that we are instructed to consistently care for? Or rather, that the people of God are consistently instructed to care for. The poor, you hear us having a responsibility towards them, all right? Now, the thing is, with that word poor, is it's a relative term. Because if I said, how many of you here are poor, some people might raise their hands. It's a relative term because typically you place yourself up next to what you would deem as poor or rich, okay? Kind of like if somebody said here they're fat. Oh, I'm fat. And then you come stand next to me and you're not doing that great. You know what I mean? You're not doing too bad, rather. And so poor can be used as a relative term. And so somehow there can be this huge chasm of a loophole on how we take care of the poor. Because we can begin to say, oh, you know what, they have this and they have this and they have this. They have opportunities. And so God goes even further and he gives us instructions to care for 3 other groups of people. You ready for them? The orphan. Those whose parents are not here. The widow. The one who no longer has a husband. And of course, these days are a little different, but consistently throughout the Old Testament, the orphan and the widow are mentioned But you know the third group of people? The foreigner, the immigrant, the alien. Now, before you think that I'm up here about to start preaching some kind of politics, okay, just slow down, because all I want to do is talk about what God's asking of us, okay? So this is what he says, that when you plant, and I know that he's speaking to a mostly agrarian society, that most of us here are not dependent upon agriculture as your primary source of income, okay? But I do think that this passage can still speak to us very relevantly, amen? So this is what he says. When you plant your fields, you should create a whole margin that doesn't belong to you anymore. That whole outside, that whole outer edge, every single edge that you come to, don't go all the way to it. You should create space for those who don't have anything. You should create space for those who are traveling. You should create space for those who are hungry. And they can come through and not even push their way into your land too far, because you have now taken care of them. You have created space for them to be fed. You should create a whole margin of your life that exists for someone else, not just for you, not just for me, mine, and ours, not just for your family, but for those who may come in contact with your geographical property. Now, these days we do everything to protect our stuff. We go through great lengths to protect everything that we can that is ours. And we look for every little loophole that we can to protect every dollar that we have. We look for every means of security that we can have to protect everything that's ours, and I understand that, okay? And I do believe that the Bible supports us to be able to own things. But how do you view your stuff? Is it just for you? Because if we get to a point where the things that God blessed us with, if they were just for us, then we've missed a lot of the gospel here, and we've missed the very heart of God. I want you to understand what God was trying to do when he gave the law, is that he was trying to set aside a people for himself, a holy nation, a royal priesthood, people that would begin to look more and more like him. And because he's a hospitable God, has he taken care of you?
Yeah.
Has he been good to you?
Yeah.
Has he been faithful?
Yeah.
Then God has called us to look more and more like him. He is a God who has created space and filled that space so that we could enjoy it. That's what hospitality looks like. That his people should be a people of hospitality. Now, he says that when you go through and you finally do harvest what you have, don't go back a second time. In fact, anything that has fallen, the gleanings, that's what it's called, if there are grapes that have fallen to the ground, leave them there. Let someone else have it. Now, here's the thing. How many of you have fruit trees, nut trees, etc. in your house? If someone comes onto your property and they begin to take your fruit and nuts, does that feel a little weird to you? I mean, I feel weird if somebody just parks in front of my house these days. Why do they park there? Lots of parking all around here, right? Why are you parking in front of my house? It's this weird sense of how people have pressed into our territory. So we might say that this is a cultural command that was given to the Israelites that might not be applicable to us, but if God has commanded them to create space for other people, people that they might not even know, not just their favorite people, but people who might be traveling, people who might be immigrants in that land, people who might be hungry. Do you think that some might listen to the words of God and take it seriously? Now, I told you about chapter 19. You can go through and read through all of them, okay? Because there's some stuff that you would have to culturally unpack as well. But just follow me to a couple places, all right? I want to go to verse 16, and then I'm going to head to another place once I get through these three verses, all right? Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Remember that next time you cut somebody off, don't use your turn signal, okay? Verse 17, do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so that you will not share in his guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people. But love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. God has connected us together. He has given us a responsibility to each other to love your neighbor as yourself. Now remember, there was a young man who wanted to test Jesus in this, and he asked, who is my neighbor? And Jesus gave this parable of the Good Samaritan. We'll talk about that next week, okay? But he says that greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with what? All your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, in Scripture, I have found evidence of at least one guy, at least one, who took very seriously this call not to pick the edges of his field, who took very seriously this call of hospitality. In fact, him taking this call of kingdom hospitality so seriously would actually link him up in this great story of Jesus Christ as well, just generations later. So follow me to the story of Ruth. Some of you are already aha right here, right? Now Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi, Ruth has made a commitment to her that wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And so she has followed her mother-in-law Naomi to her homeland. Ruth chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they called back. Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, whose young woman is that? The foreman replied, she is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in any other field. Don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the fields where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, why have I found favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls. In the meantime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread, dip it in the wine vinegar. Here he is sharing even beyond that, not just giving her what's left over. Now, it's easy to take your old holy drawers and give them to somebody, right? Much different to share something that you feel is of worth and of value. Over the last few weeks, I've been telling you kind of some of how I feel that United Church can move forward as we seek to live united and be the church and make disciples. I think that if there is a single way that as we get dispersed out of here every single week, if there's a single way that people could know that God was with us, that God was moving among us, that God had really done something in our hearts, it would be the way that we love. It would be the way that we share. It would be the way that we are concerned about our neighbors. It would be these eyes that we have to see people as people and not just part of the traffic that jams up Orlando. They would be unique individuals fingerprinted by the hand of God. I think that there's no greater way for us to really be the church. I think there's no other way that would open more doors for the gospel to be considered by our neighbors. I think there's no greater way for us to build relationships than for you as an individual. Remember, I asked you weeks and weeks ago, what is the greatest resource that we have at United Church? It's not our building. It's not our nearly 12 acres here of beautiful property. It's not the financial resources that we have here. It's our people. The greatest resource of United Church is our people. The greatest resource for the kingdom is you. And the doors of your community swing open when people know that you care about them. So at the end of this month, I'm going to ask us to launch something that I have called UCASA. You can come up with a better name if you like, all right? Or United House. UCASA is what I'm kind of imagining as at least once every quarter or once every few months that you intentionally find a couple of people to invite to your house. That you intentionally invite a couple of neighbors to your house to share a meal, not with some kind of plan of conversion, okay? But just to open your doors to build relationships. Now, some of you may already be getting some people on your mind, because I know that as I have been only just a few months in my neighborhood right around the corner here in Deerwood, it's hard to get to know neighbors, especially in COVID. It seems like people duck in their houses aside from walking their dogs. I remember Deborah Crawford told me that she needs to do a better job at remembering her neighbors' names because she can remember their dogs' names, but not theirs. To find a way that God would open a door. That might just mean you knocking on the door and say, hey, listen, we live next door. Do you really know your neighbors? I know that this is something that Joe's Sunday school class is starting to talk about. Now, not just in the general sense like your neighbors, all right? I mean like literally, like the people that live close to you. Do you know them? Some of you who live in your neighborhood a long time, maybe. But some of you have also probably lived in your neighborhood a long time, and your neighborhood is starting to change because some of you have had for sale signs all throughout your neighborhood. They don't last very long these days, though. Neighborhoods have been turning over. They've been changing. It's a great opportunity. In fact, the amount of people who have moved into your neighborhood might be one of the greatest opportunities that you have to build relationships and to swing wide the door of hospitality. To say that I have created space here. There's something that you need, like, for instance, I remember when I was living in Kentucky, there was a guy who he only had the use of one arm. Now that right arm was really strong, like the guy had the most serious forearm I ever saw. And he was using a push mower. And he came to my house because I had this little like Forrest Gump riding mower, and his push mower had gone out. And he said, do you think that I could pay you to either borrow your mower because my grass has gotten pretty high, or you could come and do it? I said, well, you don't have to pay me anything. I mean, I live 2 houses down. I'm going to come mow your grass, all right? So I cranked up my little Forrest Gump rear motor mower, and I rode over to his house and cut his grass. But here's the thing. So he wanted to pay me after that. I said, here's the thing. I have 2 keys to my shed. Here's the other key. I only need one of them, all right? Unless the kids lose one. Here's the key to my shed. When you need the mower, come and get it. And for the longest time, he would come over and just grab, I would hear the mower crank up out of the shed, and he would go mow his yard. Didn't bother me at all. He and I became friends because of this mower situation. Grass grows, you know. And then he says to me, he says, I really appreciate you letting me use your lawnmower. I'd kind of like to get one of my own, but I don't have access to the internet. I said, well, let's start looking up. So we started looking up stuff. I said, well, you know, you don't need to buy one. You can just keep using mine. He said, well, I mean, I'd like to get my own. I got a little money now. I'd like to get my own. So we had a little budget here. Told me what his budget was. We went on, found him, not a push mower, but a little riding mower that he can now use. Listen, this is just opportunities that neighbors should keep their eyes open for. It was just me being able to mow grass. It didn't take a lot of effort on my part. I mean, I sat there, I kind of liked riding a mower. But would you like for the Lord to use you? In fact, that should be our prayer. God, would you use me, whatever I have? Could it be used for the kingdom's advancement? Who knows what kind of testimony, who knows what kind of story will happen when you consider what the edges of your life look like. And here's the thing, it doesn't just look like your stuff either. It doesn't just look like your food pantry. Sometimes the edges also means that you create space and don't plan your schedule all the way out to the edge. Sometimes you leave room in your schedule for God to use you. Because if we're honest, that some days we're just way too busy. Sometimes we would like to help somebody, but we don't really have the time. Have you ever been in the position where you would like to have a conversation with someone, but you didn't want to bother them because you knew how busy they were? Listen, I got a lot going on in my life, but I don't want to make anybody feel like that. Like they're not worth my time. I remember one time I saw a guy who was sitting outside of a Publix. And I decided that I would get a little Publix chicken tender dinner for him. I like Publix chicken tender dinners. And I thought that I'd just give it to him on my way out. Usually I don't give cash to folks, but I would like to help them in whatever they might need. So I saw him sitting there. He wasn't holding a sign, just sitting there. And I come back out with the chicken tender dinner and say, hey, would you like to have this? And he looks up at me and says, I don't want that. So it's chicken tenders. Everybody likes chicken tenders. Thought I had done something good. He says, no, I don't want that. I got my truck, and I was like, well, I'll eat the chicken tenders. I'm kind of like mad, though. I'm like, I'm trying to do something for the guy, eat what he wanted and throw the rest away. I thought, he's too good for Publix chicken tenders? People on the streets come up these days, you know? Got picky. I decided to get back out of the truck, and I went back over. I said, hey, I want to apologize if I offended you. Just assume that, you know, it might be something that you wanted or needed. He said, you know, that's the problem. People come by me all the time, and they assume they know what I need. But nobody ever asked me. In that moment, I was really checked. I said, well, is there something that would help you even more? And I thought he was about to ask me for some cash. I really thought that. He said, I'm a diabetic. And, I mean, not a lot of stuff there that I want to have and eat. I said, well, you want to come in and we can walk around together and pick it up. He said, you do that? I said, yeah. We walked around, had a conversation. Sometimes the greatest thing you can give somebody is your time. Sometimes the greatest means of hospitality that you can be is just to be present. Some of you already drawn a correct line to how God behaved with us, right? You see, God didn't just send us a note. He didn't just send us a message, though he did send us messengers, right? He did give us the word of God, but the greatest gift that God gave us was himself. The greatest gift that God gave to humanity was to take on flesh in what we call the incarnation. The greatest gift that God gave us was himself. And if we are to be more and more like Jesus, then we'll be incarnational, we'll be present, we'll be the flesh and bones in our neighborhood and in our community as well. I believe that God has called us to this task of hospitality. Now I want you to begin to pray about how God might call you to respond to that. I want you to pray about how God might use you to reach some over the next half of this year, okay? You got 5 months left of 2021. Maybe a couple of people just come to mind. Maybe just a couple of people are impressed upon your heart right now that you could just have a conversation with, invite them over for dinner. Maybe God is calling you to participate in his heart for hospitality, making space, making room for others. Let's say a word of prayer. Lord God, I thank you for your mercy and grace that's new today. I thank you that you continue to speak to us, and I thank you that you've also included us into your call of redeeming the world. God, while many of us are uncomfortable with preaching or maybe even leading things like a Bible study, but we can do hospitality. In fact, I believe that every single one of us can do it. So I pray that we would make space, that we would make room to love our neighbors as ourselves. That we could be your representatives, your ambassadors, as the Apostle Paul says, to this world. Use us, Lord God. We praise the name of Jesus.